welcome to day 2 of Unit 3. Today we're going to talk about some of the various explorers that made a big impact during this age of discovery, European explorers specifically. You'll notice in your notes that you do not have a lot of room to write down a ton of information about these men. So what I want you to focus on are where is this man from originally, what country sponsored him, and also I need you to tell me, listen out for what was his claim to fame, what was the big deal that he did, what was it that was so important that he contributed to this age of exploration. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. Excuse me. This is Jacques Cartier. Jacques Cartier is French, and yes, that is how you say his name, Jacques Cartier. It's not Jacques or Jacques or Cartier or anything like that. Jacques Cartier. He sailed for France. He's French. His claim to fame is that he discovered the mouth of the St. Lawrence River in eastern Canada. From there, he went on to explore more of the area. He sailed along the St. Lawrence River until he came to a very large island in the middle of the river. There was this huge mountain that very clearly dominated the island, so he named the island Mont Royal, which in French means Mount Royal, but nowadays we refer to it as Montreal. So not only did he name Mont Royal, he also gave Canada its name. So his goal in sailing was to find gold, of course, but also he was looking for a northwest passage to China. Please make sure you have that written down. He was looking for a northwest passage to China. He began exploring this area in the early 1530s, in May of 1534 to be exact. On his first expedition there, he managed to meet with the Huron tribe, which is the tribe of Native Americans that were living in this area, and was very well liked by the natives. In fact, when he returned to France in September of 1534, he actually took 2 natives, which were quite possibly the sons of the Huron tribal leader at that time, back to France with him. After 3 expeditions, he finally goes home to France, where he ends up living out the rest of his days as a very well-respected citizen. He ends up dying in 1557, from typhus, which is a type of infection. All right, Vasco da Gama. He is Portuguese. He was sponsored by Portugal, and he is known for sailing from Portugal to India. So the tip of Africa had previously been rounded by another Portuguese explorer, but da Gama made it all the way to the eastern coast of India. His claim to fame was finding a direct sea route from Europe to Asia. And so with this new sea route, there's more opportunity for trade now. When da Gama arrived in India in 1497, he was amazed by all of the spices and silks, precious gems that were available in all of the shops there. The sailors ended up filling their ships with things like pepper and cinnamon, and when they returned to Portugal in 1499, their cargo was worth 60 times the expense of the voyage itself, okay? So the whole cost of the trip, that's the expense of the voyage, but everything that they were bringing back with them, the cargo on the ships was worth 60 times that amount. Huge, huge, huge profit there. So this voyage more than paid for itself. Da Gama's legacy is that he gave Portugal major power in the Indian Ocean by establishing a trade route, along with trade outposts along the coast of Africa. Interesting fact, though, da Gama's father was actually assigned the task of finding the route to Asia, but he died before the voyage could begin. So because Vasco had been very well educated in mathematics and navigation, this task was then passed on to him when he was 28 years old. All right, Francisco Pizarro. Not a very nice guy here. Doesn't look very nice in this portrait. He really wasn't very nice at all to Native Americans. He was born around 1475 to a very poor family. He was illiterate, and before he became this great explorer, his job was tending pigs until he joined the Spanish army when he was a teenager. Eventually, he ends up in South America. In 1532, he conquers the Incan Empire. Pizarro and his army, which was about 200 men, they met with the Incan ruler Atahualpa, who had an unarmed army of about 30,000 men with him. Pizarro's men hid, and then they ambushed the Incan army, and they kidnapped Atahualpa, who they held for ransom. And the money that they were demanding was the equivalent of $15 million in silver and gold. Well, after receiving the ransom, the Spanish ended up strangling Atahualpa, and the remaining Incans were completely demoralized, and so they retreated. Pizarro goes on to march on to the Incan capital. and conquered it with absolutely no issue. Incan culture began its decline while Pizarro ruled because they were forced into Christianity and they could no longer speak their native language, but instead they had to speak Spanish. By the mid-1500s, the Spanish had completely created an American empire, including New Spain and other lands in South and Central America and the Caribbean. Pizarro's main objective in life was to gain wealth and power for Spain. So, because of all of these issues that had been going on, Pizarro actually ends up being assassinated by the family of his former exploring partner after Pizarro's brother had killed his former partner in exploration. So not a very nice guy. He's definitely a fascinating figure. If you want to go back and do a little bit more research on him, I would highly suggest that. He's an interesting character. Here is his route. Sorry, I should have had that up a second ago. So you can see where he left from Spain. He ends up down here in like Central America, and this is where he proceeds to come on in to Peru. He established the capital of Peru there, and then he marches on down further into South America there. All right, Christopher Columbus. I know you've all heard of him before, and you might remember the phrase in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, from when you were in elementary school. Columbus is credited with discovering the Americas, but we know that there had been Native Americans in North, Central, and South America long before Columbus came. Columbus's goal was to find a western path to India. In other words, he thought that he could reach India by sailing across the Atlantic Ocean. Before heading off to discover and explore, he worked as a cartographer, which is a map maker, and a bookseller. While his rediscovery of the Americas sparked new interest for Europeans to explore and benefit, the Native Americans did not benefit from this rediscovery. Huge populations of natives were completely wiped out due to disease. About an estimated 3 to 5 million people died over a span of 50 years because of death by disease or starvation and war. Columbus himself is reported to have died from natural causes in 1506, and you can see here are the routes of his 4 voyages here. All right, Sir Francis Drake, he was nicknamed the English Sea Dog. He was an English explorer, he was a sea captain, a navigator, a politician, and a pirate. This guy is quite the interesting guy. His claim to fame is that he managed to finally end Spanish rule and domination over the seas and the New World, which allowed England to become a superpower and a global power. Drake joined the Royal Navy when he was just a teenager. He was an excellent sailor, and by the time he was 22, he was in command of his own ship. He was instrumental in the defeat of the Spanish Armada, which you should remember happened under the rule of Elizabeth I. Now, his greatest achievement was being the first Englishman. That's the key word here. Make sure you have this part written down. He is the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe. So while you write that in your notes, make sure you underline Englishman, okay? So to the English, he's viewed as a hero, but of course to the Spanish, he is viewed as a pirate and as a villain. Oops. Sorry about that. All right, so on to Hernando Cortes. He is a Spanish man. He was born in Spain, and the country that was sponsoring him was Spain as well. So Hernando Cortes was born in 1485, and while a lot of information is not really known about him, his personal friend and biographer described him as restless, haughty, and mischievous. At the age of 14, he was sent off to school, and by the age of 16, he had returned home because he was completely bored with it. Upon returning home, he studied horsemanship, weaponry, and field sports. At the age of 19, Cortes joins a ship heading for the New World. He helped conquer Hispaniola, which was given a large estate as a thank you for, as a reward for helping to conquer Hispaniola. He was also given many native slaves as well. A few years later, he's placed in command of a large expedition to conquer and colonize interior Mexico. His main objective was to conquer land in the New World for Spain's glory. Mission ends up being canceled, but Cortes ignores these orders and he continues on anyway. He made alliances with natives in an effort to increase his military numbers. He marched on to Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital city, where they were openly and peacefully received by the ruler Moctezuma II. In an effort to appease the Spaniards, Moctezuma gave them gifts of gold, but this only made them more greedy and want more. Cortes ends up taking Moctezuma captive and murdering him. This resulted in the Aztecs fighting back, which forces Cortes and his men to flee, but Cortes receives replacement troops, and they went right back into Tenochtitlan and conquered the city. So after conquering the Aztecs, it was easy for him to go on and colonize Mexico, which is now known as New Spain at this point. As a result, he gains gold, resources, and fame for Spain. He ends up dying in Seville, Spain from pleurisy, which is an inflammation of the lining of the lungs. Magellan. Ferdinand Magellan was born into a family of nobles in 1480. Because of his family connections, he served in the royal Portuguese court, and he may have even been at one point in time a page to the queen. His first sea adventure came about when he was around 25 years old. By the time he was 35 or so, he had a plan to sail west around South America to the Spice Islands. Okay, and the Spice Islands are going to be over here in like Indonesia, in this area. So Magellan had convinced the King of Spain to pay for his voyage. He had about 250 men and 5 ships when he sailed around South America and into the waters of the Pacific Ocean. After sailing for months with absolutely no land in sight, food supplies were getting low, and the crew was getting very restless and unhappy. There had been rumors of mutiny, but Magellan had caught wind of this, and he was not happy about it. So some of the mutineers were marooned, meaning that they were kicked off the ship and had to fend for themselves. This could have been on a piece of land. This could have been in the middle of the ocean. They were just left to fend for themselves. Others were sentenced to hard labor. Still others were tortured. And then there were others that he actually just straight up executed. So his claim to fame is that he and his crew were the very first to circumnavigate or go all the way around the globe. He ended up being murdered in a battle with natives in 1521, but there have been 2 galaxies, 2 craters on the moon, and 1 crater on Mars that have been named after him. The Strait of Magellan was also named after Ferdinand Magellan, which can be found here down at the southern tip of South America, right down here. Here's your Strait of Magellan. All right, Vespucci, Amerigo Vespucci. He is Italian. His sponsoring countries or nations were Portugal and Spain. He's not very well known, but he's a very interesting fellow. He was born in Florence, Italy during the early 1450s. His family was very prominent, and he was very well educated. Before settling on a career of exploration when he was 20 years old, he was a bookkeeper for the de Medici family. Remember them? We talked about Lorenzo de Medici during our Renaissance unit. Well, that's exactly who we're talking about here. That's who he was working for. Now you have a sense of the time period here. So Vespucci ended up working in Spain. He ended up in Spain, and he was introduced to Columbus. Yes, Christopher Columbus, before his first voyage to the New World, where he would rediscover America. You already know that after Columbus had discovered the Americas, he returned to Spain, but not everyone was pleased with him because he had not, in fact, sailed to India, because that had been his main goal. Vespucci heard all of the sailors talking about wanting to return to the New World, and he wanted to go there himself. He knew that Columbus's route was not, in fact, the route to Asia, but to a new continent. And in the early 1500s, there was a map maker in Germany who named the continents of North and South America after Amerigo. Amerigo Vespucci ended up dying from malaria just 1 month before his 58th birthday. Whoops, I went backwards, sorry. And here you can see his route there. All right, our last guy, Pedro Cabral. He was born in 1467 and came from a very well-to-do family in Portugal. His objective was to establish a trading post in India and solidify the trade relations that Vasco da Gama had originally arranged. There's not too much to know about Cabral, but he was responsible for a couple of important discoveries. He was the first European to discover Brazil in South America. He also managed to establish solid trading in India. But perhaps most importantly, he was sent by Portugal to see if any land that belonged to Portugal had been affected by the Treaty of Tordesillas. At this time, there was major rivalry between Spain and Portugal. Both countries are wanting to claim as much land as possible and expand their empires. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI suggested an imaginary line here. It's this dotted one. This is the line that he suggested, dividing, running north to south through the Atlantic Ocean. Portugal complained that Spain had received too much, so the demarcation line was moved further west and included parts of modern-day Brazil. So this is the line that was moved further west here. Treaty of Tordesillas was signed by both Spain and Portugal in 1494, and that was that. It divided the two areas between them.